Welcome to the audiobook Buddhism and the Youth, written by Master Tuệ Sỹ. In this insightful exploration, we delve into the timeless teachings of Buddhism and discover how they resonate with the challenges and aspirations of today's youth. Reading by Lily Le. Introduction. How long will it be until Vietnamese Buddhism sees another master like Tuệ Sỹ? I do not know, and neither does anyone else. But from what I have seen and experienced over more than half a century of my life, I know it must be a very long time. A master with all the qualities of compassion, wisdom, and fearlessness like him is a brilliant manifestation of the true spirit of the Dharma in this mundane life. It can be said to be as rare as the Udambara flower. Therefore, deep in my heart, I always feel joyous and highly grateful for his presence in our generation and those who continue. As I have said, his presence is like a natural glue that has bonded us, the lay practitioners, those who lead, and those who follow, on the same path of practice and service. The Master's figure, wherever he may be, is like a guiding light, a firm and comforting spiritual support for us whenever we face the storms of life. The teachings of the Master compiled in this book are not entirely new. We have been learning from his scattered lectures or through the scriptures and treatises he has written for a long time. Moreover, his life's journey is an even more vivid and comprehensive lesson. However, along with those Dharma teachings and with the same spirit of fearless compassion, this slim volume also conveys the Master's immense love for the youth. Thus, each word and teaching is no longer just rigid standards or strict doctrines, but like the gentle words of a kind father wishing to advise and guide his children. If these teachings do not reach the following generations, it would be a significant fault of ours, who have been fortunate to receive his teachings, whether directly or indirectly. Therefore, from half a world away, when we heard about Master's illness, we immediately thought of doing something to express our deep gratitude towards him. The most practical action that aligns with Master's lifelong wishes would be spreading his teachings to the younger generation, those for whom he has always had great hopes for the future of the nation and the Dharma. Master's teachings are also the faithful Dharma. When the true Dharma is spread, ignorance and evil naturally dissolve, just as the morning sun quickly disperses the fog. Therefore, with the united efforts of some Buddhist friends in the U.S., our United Buddhist Publisher has published this book to distribute widely to Buddhists all over the world. Master's teaching, when reaching the youth, will be irreplaceable spiritual values. In the long discourses, the Buddha often taught that the faithful Dharma has the power to lift what has been overturned, to reveal what has been hidden, to show the way to those who are lost, and to bring a lamp into the darkness so that those with eyes may see forms. These functions are essential for today's youth, when many traditional moral values are being overturned, many positive spiritual values are hidden. Many people are lost on the path of practice. In such a situation, the nation and the Dharma urgently need those who can bring a lamp into the darkness. To do so, today's youth cannot ignore the Master's teachings. I hope that the widespread circulation of this book will be like bringing a lamp into the darkness, so that the Master's teaching always illuminate today's and tomorrow's generations. Thoughts on the approach to Buddhist education for young people. Vietnamese Buddhism is currently witnessing turmoil and crises unprecedented in history. From organizational models to daily rituals, including funerals and weddings, there is a hasty attempt to mold after Western patterns, eroding some of our nation's spiritual traditions. Additionally, the influence of consumer society and political power pressure has fostered unhealthy mindsets stemming from a lack of foundational teachings in worldly and religious authority figures. This situation has undoubtedly negatively impacted the education of Vietnamese Buddhist youth. Today, when we talk about Vietnamese youth, we should picture two straight lines converging at a point in consumerist society. These are the youth within the country and those abroad. Although both are educated in a Western model, their societal differences are based on political power, not natural development trends. This artificial distinction is like being stuck in a quagmire, not knowing where to find solid ground. Vietnamese youth are being uprooted, thus at risk of losing or indeed have already lost their direction. Vietnamese Buddhist youth are no exception and find overcoming this state of lost direction challenging. Here, when I speak of losing direction, I view it from a national and ethnic perspective. Young Vietnamese abroad need only momentarily forget or set aside their Vietnamese origins to find their direction upon entering university. In other words, Vietnamese youth overseas are not entirely uprooted, but are in a state of transplantation. For instance, if southern tangerines are planted in the north, they may become sweeter or sourer or even fail to thrive due to unsuitable conditions. The youth in the country are like trees, still firmly attached to their native roots. But to survive and develop quickly, influenced by external attractions, they risk being uprooted. Most young Vietnamese today know very little about their ancestors' past, their love, their thoughts, how they caught up with the universal spiritual values of humanity. The Vietnamese Buddhist youth family may still try to cling to traditional roots to grow. Still, due to irresponsible or unaware leadership, they are subjected to misdirection, similar to a doctor who, unsure of proper treatment, prescribes sleeping pills to make patients forget the era's pains that the youth need to understand to choose their future life directions. Furthermore, due to political pressure, youth are required to assemble into vanguard and reserve forces to protect the regime, so Buddhist teachings for the youth are not allowed beyond temple gates. In the temples, teachings on impermanence and non-self are not presented as natural and societal movement laws, but as a gray life canvas painted by those weary with age, successes, and failures. In a society where traditional spiritual values are being eroded, some youths in large cities rely on their parents' political power or corrupt money to behave perversely. Others study hard to become new loyal slaves to wealthy bosses. Others resign themselves to the fate of poverty, illiteracy, and the humiliation of a backward, impoverished nation. In this context, the presence of groups like the Young Buddhist Association, units of youth seeking a purpose in life, becomes a societal challenge and a political threat if they cannot be manipulated to serve dark ambitions, ready to betray the country for personal glory. So, it's almost a fantasy to say that we gather youth only to teach the Dharma and nothing else. It's like herding fawns for tigers to manipulate easily. Of course, a country needs its youth for development. Buddhism also needs young people to continue its mission of helping all sentient beings. In this regard, Buddhist education for youth is not just about luring them into temple walls to isolate them from bars, nightclubs, and other tempting, decadent environments. However, fundamental Buddhist education must still be about cultivating morality and developing spiritual awareness. Cultivating morality. First, let's talk about cultivating morality. This doesn't involve cramming moral doctrines. It means not telling young people what they can or cannot do. Youth will do whatever they find suitable for the era. However, it's essential to prevent them from being drawn to the harmful elements of the period, avoiding misdirection by current trends. Therefore, it's necessary to establish a safe and mobile space for them. This safe space is the Bodhi mind, and its mobility is a bodhisattva's non-attached, unpillared characteristic. We will discuss these 2 points further. Growing up in prosperous cities and entering society with high education and a stable life, part of the youth rarely directly experience the hardship of their peers in darker, unfamiliar regions. Lacking empathy for others' suffering, they also need an understanding of life's essence and the meaning of survival. Therefore, bringing Buddhism to the youth means getting them face to face with the reality of survival. This is to ignite the Bodhi mind in youth. Where there is danger, I vow to be a bridge. Where there is darkness, I vow to be a torch. This may seem like a far-fetched promise, even impractical to some, but it's the solid ground on which young people can establish their life direction and define fundamental values for their lives. Mobility is about being open, not confined to narrow societal spaces, so that young people can see beyond prejudices and closed traditions. More specifically, youth are educated to be always ready to embark, to go anywhere on earth where suffering is more natural, happiness is genuinely tested. In another sense, such mobility equates to adventure. Since living in stable cities, humanity has extinguished the adventurous spirit in youth but awakened the tourism spirit in adults looking for new pleasures to replace their daily monotony. The non-attached spirit of bodhisattva differs significantly. It means not being anchored in the cycle of birth and death, samsara, nor fixated on nirvana. It's a spirit of liberation, not tied to any tradition or value. Young people need to learn to live with this open-mindedness and generosity, to accurately evaluate the value of world civilizations, and choose their path within the harmonious development of all human societies, despite differences in religion, beliefs, traditions, perspectives, opinions, and even daily life habits. Developing spiritual awareness. We speak of learning through traditional Buddhist scriptures on developing spiritual awareness in youth. The three baskets, Tripitaka, of Buddhist teachings are an immense treasure trove of knowledge. Based on the Buddha's fundamental teachings about life's value and the nature of suffering and happiness, many laws related to nature, society, psychology, linguistics, and humanity were discovered over various epochs and geographical regions with different historical and traditional backgrounds. However, we also know that in the history of world civilizations, existing or extinct, no doctrine has not been surpassed by later generations. Some doctrines were surpassed and permanently discarded, others were surpassed and then revived, but very few principles were revived without being distorted, some so severely that if compared to the past, they would appear monstrous. The Buddhist teachings affirm the law of impermanence, so the issue is about suitability to truth and individual understanding, not about being surpassed or discarded. Young people studying Buddhism should not aim to become Buddhist scholars, but practice and live the teachings themselves, using their sharp and flexible thinking to assess life's nature directly. Thus, studying Dharma should not hinder worldly learning. Buddhist knowledge should not conflict with secular knowledge. The only difference is that learning Dharma starts with understanding human suffering to recognize genuine happiness. Compassion and youth are the solid wings that will carry young individuals through the limitless spaces of life. Buddhism and the youth. My dear friends, the topic of our discussion today is Buddhism and the young people. Such title tends to create an impression that Buddhism comes in many different forms, and each form caters to certain generation or certain socio-economic class. But then, one can also believe that there is only one Buddhism, and today's topic will examine thoroughly the basic characteristics of Buddhism, and extract from them the conclusion as to whether Buddhism in that sense would be appropriate for the young people. Of course, here, all of you are Buddhists, so the answer is probably already available long ago. We are not going to state any definition nor reference Buddhism in any particularity or trait, no matter what definition we use or on what side we would see it. In so saying, it may still be hard for you to grasp the heart of the matter. Many of you probably have read books on Zen Buddhism, or at least have heard of Zen koan, which somewhat goes like this. A person asked the master, "What is Buddha?" His master replied, 3 pounds of hemp. That wasn't a jokingly replied story, nor was it an intricate statement on the transcendental philosophy microprocessed by the Zen master. But it's just because here, we are going to search for the significance of life and to discover its worth and benefits. As if defined by a writer or a poet, we are not here to characterize or describe life, because we are not looking for its encyclopedic knowledge, but we are here to explore true qualities of life. Just like a bee seeking a flower, not to find the physical beauty and alluring scent of that flower, because the flower's beauty and scent are only representations of existence. The bee only seeks the flower to extract the sweet nectar deep inside that flower in order to provide nourishment for its own surviving and that of its species. Young folks are often reminded and advised to learn to live a life worth living. Our proverbs also taught, "Be worth the value of the young as you land in the east. The east would be calm as you mount the west would be in peace." And for that our young people would think that they should perform certain illustrious acts, otherwise their life would be a waste. Some of them have, indeed, succeeded with a brilliant achievement that is worth everybody's admiration. All of us are in awe of him too. But just look into his eyes a little bit, had any of us here has a mind to do so. What do we find in those eyes? Would we see a lofty, vast firmament onto which an eagle majestically stretches its wings, or would it be a lost heaven in the regretful reminiscences of his youth as he left behind his most beloved for the conquest of fame? The answer would be both. One would chase after illusion to search for his own real image. Where is the sweetness of life on either side? Now we are temporarily leaving the romantic panorama to look into another aspect of it. Could there be any other picture worth more in appreciation? that depends again on the viewer's artistic standpoint. Long ago, there was a prince to whom the golden throne was to be expected, and under whom the hoofs pounded on the long march in submission. That night, as the whole royal palace was sound asleep in the deep and quiet night of power, fame, and wealth, the prince ordered his charioteer to saddle the best of his war horses. But his galloping horse would not trample the battlefield. His powerful dagger would not overthrow the pathetic enemy. From then on, the royal footsteps began gallivanting all through to the ends of the mountains and rivers, at times lonesome by the waters or alone under the treetops. What did he want to find? Let's hear him say, and then Obicus, while in my youth, with hair still dark and life full of vitality, despite the disapproval of the parents, their face stained with tears of sorrow. I have left the family. I have shaved and donned the frock. I have chosen the celibate life. Leave behind everything in order to seek something more virtuous, to find a direction guiding towards superiority, to search for a trace of an ultimate tranquility. Thus he left. He searched, and he discovered the way leading to a peaceful realm and perpetual happiness. So the path that he had taken was then announced and introduced to others. These capable people are like the lotus flowers that only grow in the muddy standing water, but these lotus flowers would bloom upward out of the filthy mud so that they themselves are not tampered by the stench from which they come. However, the path that was announced and introduced was not by any mean an easy acceptance with faith by everyone. The people who protested against it were not in small numbers. When the young master arrived in Magda, one of the most powerful nations of that time, several young men from wealthy families like Yasa and his friends, other well-educated men like Sariputra and Magallana, or young men of royal descent, princes and noble courtiers, took turn to leave behind their own family and denounce their grand social status, to accept the glorious path to ultimate truth. From a certain perspective, their leaving did produce a large vacancy in society, causing a disturbing upheaval to the ordinary life that everyone was accustomed to. So people worried. They started to discuss the situation in whisper at first. Then disapproval and disappointment came among them, and at last they even got angry. This opinionated inclination also initiated a wave of opposition. Sramana Gautama is causing fathers to lose their sons, wives to become widows. Sramana Gautama disrupts our normal family life. But the trend in opposition did not last long enough to become real public hostility, because not for very long afterwards these fathers and young wives realized that they were not actually forgotten or deserted by their loved ones, but that they were finally shown the fantastic taste of love and happiness which was absent in their lives for the longest time. So from the initial introduction, this rightful way, this preeminent and ultimate path that could lead to an everlastingly blissful world, did not materialize by the power conquered with daggers and blades, but by the power that comes from compassion and wisdom. This supreme path was graciously accepted by the young generation of people, the brightest class of society, the ones who would stipulate the future direction of the whole populace. Maybe we ought to stop right here. That image may seem too far-fetched, unreachable, and overwhelming for a lot of people. Despite the fact, not a single one of us, male or female young person, would not agree, from the deepest of our heart, that we are driven by an unrestrained, powerful force. This power is called the desire to dominate, such as dominating love, conquering fame, and attaining status in life. It doesn't matter from what angle or direction one looks at it. It is like all of us are little children chasing after a butterfly. Once you hold the dead butterfly satisfactorily in your hands, would you ever wonder, what do this conquest and this victory mean to me? No, we don't ever wonder that. We continue to chase one butterfly after another. In the history of humankind, how many famous conquerors after each victory would only see themselves as just small delicate ones in front of the power of gentle human love. The galloping stallion of Genghis Khan did not stall in front of enemies, but the great Khan's innermost feelings were not at peace when he knew that there was someone longing for his return at the other end of his conquering road. That was the last enemy to battle with. Khan knew very well that even with the combined power of his 10,000 mighty soldiers, he wouldn't be able to win over such enemy, or to claim victory over such empire. He sent for an assistant, a wisest and most proficient advisor, to help gather the supernatural power instead. His diplomat went to Zhongnanshan Mountain to seek Qi Chuji. The Taoist priest left his mountain, crossed over the desert to arrive personally at Khan's supreme headquarters, to explain his view of living forever and never dying, and to clarify the secret meaning contained in the Book of Tao, consisting in 5,000 words ascribed to Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism. At the conclusion of the holy book, once all of the riddles of that language had somewhat betrayed their hidden meaning, the great Khan came to the exclusive assertion that he would be the loser in this very last battle. So what is the significance of conquest? Each of us tends to look for something in our life, for certain significance, for the ideal and the reason to live. For the majority, love and happiness are those ideals of life. For others, it could be wealth, fame, or power. People even agonize themselves mentally or torture themselves physically in pursuit of what they think the paramount for their existence. But we also know that besides the illusory and precarious happiness of life, there are also far-reaching horizons and a path to altruistic selflessness. But only a handful of us are taking that route, and a whole lot less people reaching its destination. Why is that? Once there was a literary researcher who, when commented about the poet Li Po, had no reserve whatsoever in raving this exceptionally brilliant individual with a liberal and extravagant way of life. But then he concluded, "We are not of the class of Li Po, and we cannot live like the way Li Po lived, because we do have family, wives, and children, and many other responsibilities." Be it as it may, could it be that all of us were born predestined with a noose on our neck that Li Po was not? Could it be that we are only allowed to admire and marvel at the outstanding characters and their lives, just like a ragged beggar would only stand from far away to crave and long for the precious jewels worn by an attractive princess? Sure, Li Po cannot live like us, and of course we do not have to become like Li Po in order to have the recognition of others. Each of us has within ourselves an endless hidden treasure. There is no need to borrow or steal the attributes of another individual, and no need to inadequately evaluate ourselves. The lost son in the Lotus Sutra wouldn't think of himself as the only son and heir of the rich proprietor, the one whose power even surpassed that of many high-ranking dignitaries of the royal court. This man even felt happy when he was hired as a lowly servant, and was so proud to become the humble servant of this affluent family. He took pride in cleaning out the latrines, and was pleased to be permitted to sleep in the horses' stalls. However, deep in his essential nature, in his bloodline, and from an unlikely peculiar destiny, he was the sole inheritor of this wealthy family. He would be recognized as successor only when he himself can trace his own lineage, and can substantiate his own aristocratic significance. Otherwise, one who thought of himself no better than the breeding horse of his boss cannot have dreams to prove himself the sole heir of the family. Because that wasn't inheritance, it was more like strategic plans of a usurper. In that case, definitely would he be punished on account of his extravagant ambition. Here, while we cannot ascertain our own noble dignity and cannot appreciate the precious values of life, the values that are certainly not higher than the rows of social chairs and the steps of social ladders which are instituted in an irreversible order. Meanwhile, we call ourselves Buddhists, meaning we see ourselves as rightfully legal descendants of the Tathagatha's holy lineage. Is this somewhat contradictory? Among my young friends, many have tried to ascend and move up in life, establishing their own values. They thought that if needed and when wanted, it is not hard for them to just don the most expensive clothing or sit at the highest position in society. And when not needed anymore, they can just discard the golden throne, just like throwing away some broken shoes. Those friends, after a time struggling with life in order to prove their self-worth, some of them are lucky enough to climb up these high-profile chairs, suddenly realize that the importance and value of this life are being painted, decorated, and engraved into these chairs. So from then on, they would fasten themselves firmly onto them and insist on defending these values at any cost. Some other friends of mine, after a broken relationship, suddenly realized that happiness, so real in their own hands minutes earlier, was now just pretentious. One came to me after many days wandering around in his miserable sorrow. He came searching for me not to find a consolation, but he came to graciously lecture me on the meaning of love and eternity, and the meaning of true happiness and the supreme cause of life, the ultimate good. While listened intently to his talk, I felt like I have drunk all the drops of sweet dew dispersed from each of his burning teardrops, and I have asked myself whether my friend had realized the meaning of nirvana. Now that 30 years have passed, I have to confess that I could not forget that marvelous sermon. But just after a short time afterwards, my friend again threw himself into new romance. When I asked him why, his answer was that the sweetness of that first love could have never been adulterated with time. It forever resided in an obscure part somewhere in his heart. He only chased after frivolous and fleeting relations, pursued the empty fame, just because he attempted to forget things that was gone, and gone forever, but never could be retrieved. Once in a while, when thinking of this friend, now quite successful in his real life, I often wonder if he had ever thought back to those youthful years. Wouldn't he think he was being so stupid, chasing after illusion? And furthermore, between these two stages of his life, which one is truly illusion? They say that young people are standing at the threshold of life, so you have to prepare your baggage to enter life. I want to say it in a different way, by relating to my own youth that has passed. What I want to relay is that you, the young generation, are placed with two questions that demand immediate and confident answers, or that you are positioned at the forked road that requires your decision without hesitation, either love or achievements. In front of you is a long winding road that looms in the dim residual light of morning stars. It is not quite dawn so as to easily distinguish where you are standing and where the road you're taking will lead you. Moreover, are there really two branched out roads for you to choose, or is it just one? Which way are you going to proceed? Whether to follow the path of achievements and reputations, just as the saying goes, to have been born in the world, may one's name be impressed upon the mountains and rivers, or perhaps to pursue the silhouette of an eternal springtime. Both of them make sense, and I know all of you would understand them clearly. We do not have to go through lengthy explanation and argument, but there is one thing that I have to stress. Your understanding of the future path ahead of you is not quite what you are seeing by yourself, and knowing yourself which way to take as the first morning light breaks through. It's rather the remnants left behind from many generations before you. It's not often that one can just formulate one's own distinct pathway and not trailing any other pre-existing track, tracing slowly, step by step after other generations' direction. Only then young people can carefully develop their own future roadmap. Among these youthful individuals, many would not step out of the jungle's darkness to find for themselves, with their own eyes, the roadway that leads out to the future even when daybreak has came and the morning sun brightly shines. We will now explore in history and find such a youth. The one that came to my mind was not a stranger to any of you, and I want to remind you of the Emperor Tran Nhan Tong. When still young and growing up in lavishly splendid palace filled with joy, this aristocratic young man lived like a recluse amidst the royal kingdom, with a true hermit life of abstention and asceticism. I wonder if the graceful bearings that would have been appreciated by anyone in this young royalty, but the king-father, only seeing the dreadfully emaciated body of his own heir, could not help but uttering a cry, wondering if his son would have enough strength and energy to look after the empire, safeguarding its territory. Nonetheless, that same young man, once enthroned and residing over the entire nation, not only ascertained his own self-worth, but also substantiated the lasting existence of his whole populace. Whether sitting at the towering royal throne, or embarking impressively in the battlefield, or returning home on victorious mounts after triumphant conquests, nights after nights in the serene darkness of history, even now, we can clearly imagine the sound of his repetitive gong strikes and distinctive ritual chanting of this royally majestic king, who once viewed the throne like a pair of discarded sandals. What that is to be produced by conditions should be viewed as a dream, a mirage, a bubble. How could the one who perceives with his own eyes the whole universe as ephemeral, like dewdrops on the grass blades, nevertheless with supremacy, would be able to make up his own destination as well as that of the entire sovereignty? I hope that all of you young people out there can come up with the answers yourselves, because when you can provide answers to those questions, you surely can make up your own destination and not worry so much in making erroneous mistakes. Now we finally come back to the main discussion of our topic. Many of you, when hearing the title of this topic, would probably have thought that the speaker will present something related to certain Buddhist structural standpoint, and gathering from that viewpoint, he will analyze and explore whether it would apply to the young generation or bring about actual beliefs to the young age group. Up until now, I have not introduced any form, any structure yet. Are any of you disappointed? Well, maybe you ought to be a little disappointed. That way, it's apparent that none of you would come passively to listen to me. Whatever I say would satisfy you. Rightly so. You should have choices, even though the choices are not up to your own wishes. Beginning with realization, there would undoubtedly be options. When working with the talented capacity of youth, first of all, there is the ability to choose. Young people are educated to know how to select options. Determining one's future plan is making the right choices intelligently. Furthermore, we should not be too disenchanted if there is not a specific Buddhist structure applying to the young generation. There is only one moon up in the sky, but that moon can be graying with old age and death, or it can be a new moon freshly emerged with youthful innocence. Likewise, it can be a bright moon that bears witness to faithful hearts, or it can be an old moon of spitefulness that maliciously causes the discord between lovers. Yet other young people come to Buddhism hoping that the blessed water by the compassionate bodhisattva would revive their wilted hearts which was rejected by love. And yet others come to seek Buddhism to wash off the heel pacing after fame tainted with grey mud, or the face of marquis suntanned by the rays of great changes. They can find on their own a Buddhist structure that correlates well with them. If Buddhism cannot alleviate their mental sufferings and their weariness of life, it would be just like a doctor refusing to treat sick patients. Therefore, you are advised to find your own viewpoint that corresponds with Buddhism, not taking those that are already being modeled by others such as your superiors, your reverend monks, or some other brilliant researchers. A Vietnamese Zen master once said, "Young people should bear in themselves the will of soaring high, and not content with retracing the footsteps of the Buddhas, though. We will walk the path that we select ourselves, no need to drudgingly follow after the trace of others." This manner of speaking sometimes causes people to feel bewildered. Wouldn't it be too conceited, too arrogant? Then please do not create a song with a quick tempo out of those words, but try to compose a gentle sonata like smooth undulating water of a lake. Then we can easily comprehend the sound of these words. Be at ease in choosing a direction for yourself, and ready to take on the responsibility for what happens along the path that you have chosen. These are the words of the Buddha that you should remember. Sentient beings are the inheritors of all actions that they have carried out themselves. And Buddha also taught us, be the successor of the Tathagatha's true dharma and not the heir of material resources. All of you are learning to prepare yourself for worthiness of being heirs. Inheritors to the heirloom of familial ancestors, inheritors to the traditions of a country's heritage, inheritors to the humankind legacy. No matter what position you are placed in, first and foremost, you, the young generation today, have to be the heirs. Victory or defeat in the position of being an heir is the responsibility of each one of you, personally, individually. Be prepared to develop your own wisdom, build your own ground, to cleverly choose the pathway to life, and be ready to accept the responsible actions for what you have committed to for your own self and all other sentient beings. There is not universal Buddhism that is broad spectrum for the entire young generation. Each one of you, individual, is representative to the dynamic form of Buddhism. I sincerely wish you would have enough strength to conquer lots of kingdoms that are to be conquered, and win over the powers that are to be won. Only wisdom is the profession. The ideals of education and methods to realize these ideals have a long history in Buddhism. Its activities are not limited to scripture halls or the dharma halls of monasteries, but also to courts, public forums, and anywhere people can gather, even if it is just two people in all human activities. Additionally, through changes over the ages and differences among nations, all are embodied in a substantial Buddhist history concerning education. However, today, this issue remains a relatively new topic for Buddhist scholars. The collision between Eastern and Western civilizations compared to the interaction between Chinese and Indian cultures from the 1st to the 11th or 12th century, characterized by the Tang and Song dynasties and an effort spanning over 10 centuries, is insignificant to the collision we witness today. Our current main difficulty is not a matter of method, as many mistakenly believe. The contributions of Buddhist scholars in the field of European languages have proven this. The preconceptions of Buddhism's philosophical and literary systems are no longer an impenetrable magic spell. In the past, how did the Chinese immediately grasp the undercurrent of Buddhism to implement it according to their national identity and literary and philosophical traditions? That is a vibrant experience. Despite the vast desert between Central Asia and the cold Tongling mountain range separating these two countries, with this natural and treacherous border, the average human ability could hardly overcome it on foot. Yet these two nations managed to sympathize with each other. Our East and West, without such unfortunate borders, why is sympathy so difficult? This means that Buddhism's difficulties, especially in education, are not due to scientific technology or spiritual tradition between the East and the West. However, if we ignore these issues, we might be prone to stepping into metaphysics like a story from Zhuangzi. You are not a fish. How do you know if the fish is happy? In Asian university discussions, people often mention Western scientific techniques and Eastern spiritual traditions. Then these are taken as a mission that Asian universities must strive to demonstrate in all the best ways. In terms of content and intention, this point is merely a slogan, nothing more. We will not intentionally examine the effectiveness of this slogan. We must accept that scientific technology is a unique and almost exclusive product of the West. Western philosophers of this century understand the nature of scientific technology exceptionally delicately. Suppose we fully understand one of the key propositions of existentialism, according to which existence precedes essence. From this we can infer that the profound nature of a particular phenomenon is immediately expressed in the means or style of reality as its particularity. This is just a general assessment. Let's take typical examples from some philosophers about their contributions to the subject of language in modern Western philosophy. We will see what constitutes the nature of scientific technology and the essence of spiritual tradition. Wittgenstein is a unique example. The guiding idea recorded in Tractatus is that language is the form of the world. Hence, our language limit is the limit of our world. This idea means that all our language methods form a particular universe or view of life. Any unimaginable discovery in a philosopher is not due to the unimaginable nature of his thoughts. However, his language and method of using language have enclosed him in the ivory tower of unimaginable thinking. Language is no longer an external and common entity that anyone can use at will to express what is hidden in their heart. Usually with the question, "What is this?" we have the impression that if the word "what" is satisfied, the problem can be solved according to the general criterion of language, XY, or E, XY. The problem is only satisfied by applying appropriate rules to the variables, depending on the relationship between general and specific quantities. However, when these quantities are examined in detail, they immediately reveal their fictitious nature. And in the end, the general criterion of language turns out to be a hypothetical proposition. Such analysis creates a feeling of disappointment with all the rules of language considered serious or accurate, and people only trust the language of poetry. Although it is not as severe and accurate as scientific technology, its ability to interpret reality is vibrant. Therefore, logical experimentalists in modern Western philosophy only listen to the language of music more than any philosophical or scientific proposition. Here, we also must remember the contributions of Michael Foucault to modern linguistic philosophy. The order of language is the order of the world. That's the main point. He named his contribution archaeology. The diversity of thought systems can be discovered here because one can find traces of human civilization history through the ages in the history of literary development. For example, one of the difficulties philosophy professors in Vietnam today have faced when presenting the concept of être, or being or seeing. Therefore, philosophy students are perplexed when Vietnamese terms do not contain these words. Existence, beings, nature, and then natural characteristics. Because the structures of the Vietnamese language does not have these opuses, European languages have been powerless about l'être et le temps. So with the structure of the Vietnamese language alone, we cannot understand the limit of this powerlessness. When a philosopher says, the question of nature is the most general and most vacuous question of all questions, but at the same time it can also be concretized and clarified in any particular nature. That is very alien to the structure of the Vietnamese language. Nature is the most general question. Indeed, l'être or être in general is French, not nature. The most painful thing for people is that nature cannot replace être. So when someone says that today's Vietnamese national disaster is deeply marked with blood and tears on the question of nature, it bitterly exposes the unfortunate fate of this nation haunted by the slogan, develop Western scientific technology and maintain Eastern spiritual tradition. Such development only means transformation and self-destruction, not maintaining anything. However, as mentioned, it is not because of trying to smoothly resolve this slogan that the activities of Buddhists thought in the field of education have faced countless difficulties. In the past, Buddhism had abandoned the characteristics of the monastic regime that had to hide in deep mountains and forests to go to places where blood and tears were shed for human life, and also abandoned its Indian color to go to where life and the desire for enlightenment about the meaning of life exist. Yet the Buddha was still a flesh and blood person, not a sublime deity. Therefore, developing or maintaining a cultural product is not a significant issue that can be interpreted as a slogan or a brand. It is fire. One can only put a sign far away, not right in the heart. That fire, once kindled, illuminates the deepest desires in man's heart so that one can clearly see what one wants in this life. Anyway, no one can ignore the achievements of Western scientific technology with its pragmatic nature for the essential needs of life, which has dramatically impacted all areas of the modern world, specifically the organizational structure of society. Even in Vietnam, in recent years, the Buddhist Church has faced several crises. The main reason must be acknowledged as the intractable problem between the principles of social organizational structure and spiritual tradition. That is, we still have to be heavily pressured by the slogan of development and maintenance, balancing scientific technology and spiritual practice. This tradition has undoubtedly been fundamentally transformed when incorporated into the organizational principles originating from the Western worldview and perspective on life, or more clearly, of science and the pragmatic nature of science. Some Western Buddhist scholars researching the organization of the Buddhist monastic community have expressed surprise. By some principle, the monastic community has overcome the crises that should have divided it, as the problem occurred and resulted in more than 20 Buddhist sects. Then, when Mahayana Buddhism emerged, the ideological conflict became even more evident. However, one still sees one thing. The monastic community's life was not divided. The church still followed a single form known as original. There is Mahayana thought, but there has never been a Mahayana church. The monastics still had to live according to the original pure precepts. Some details were modified due to geographical or temporal circumstances. For example, in cold climates like China, the practice of alms begging is challenging to implement according to the original, or it is impossible to ban food storage overnight wholly. Today, the organization of the church in Vietnam no longer takes the original pure precepts as a guiding principle, but is based on the Western division of powers. This form is transforming the spiritual traditions in some aspects. For example, the four parajikas, considered the life of the monastic structure, are gradually losing their importance. Some monks, influenced by analytical thinking, explain the parajikas somewhat strangely in the past. This situation is becoming a reality, and people can only legitimize the after-the-fact events. The internal situation is much more complicated than our current ability, so we cannot go into details. Above all, the achievements of Western scientific techniques with their pragmatic nature towards the essential needs of life have cast a heavy shadow on the minds of those striving to maintain the effectiveness of spiritual traditions. Consequently, people also demand that methods such as meditation, for example, be effective like any other scientific outcome. Thus, if science can reduce or eliminate certain calamities of everyday life, people also expect meditation to have at least equivalent, if not superior, efficacy. In the past, when someone pursued meditation, the teacher demanded they abandon any practical desires in meditation. If everyday life is improved through contemplation, avoiding some misfortunes like illnesses, it should be considered a natural result, a dependent aspect, not the purpose. One was not allowed to learn meditation to survive through the days, to live a life without misfortune. Suddenly, this notion is deemed unrealistic. An interesting anecdote recounts that when the Buddha was preparing to cross a river by ferry, he met a hermit who challenged him. With the efficacy of his meditation practice, to cross the river without a ferry, only then would it prove spiritual progress. The Buddha said he only needed a few small, easily obtained coins to cross the river, so why waste a part of his meditation life? Indeed, assessing spiritual energy based on practical efficacy creates an illusion beyond all illusions, yet this is still considered attractive. This is our difficulty. Whether today or in the past, people have always demanded that truth be tested by practical efficacy. Therefore, a perfect education system must demonstrate its effectiveness to satisfy the learner's needs. Instead of opening paths into a vibrant spiritual world, people have turned back to meet the lower needs of the learners. They sow seeds of insecurity and fear before a certain future. Terms like survival, extinction, etc. are hypothetical propositions that increase fear, but they also have a tremendous motivating power, outlining paths to follow. Just like a political candidate was threatening voters with dark visions of tomorrow if not chosen. Similarly, an educational path is chosen to be progressive and preserving, advancing yet not losing its roots. In extreme cases, Buddhism has always chosen the former approach, whether progress or preservation. The root of humanity lies in the human heart, so no matter how far it progresses with one's soul, there is nothing called loss. Familiar sayings like lay down the butcher's knife, become a Buddha on the spot, or the sea of suffering is boundless, turn back and see the shore. The above only refers to a few ideas called peripheral, because the focus of the four words retracing, solely wisdom is the profession, has been distorted so that Tuệ here means academic knowledge, including techniques, methods, indicates the slogan developing scientific techniques and maintaining spiritual traditions.